Okay, so here we are on the webpage of Iran El Haik, PhD. He studies population, medical, and evolutionary genomics, or genomics. I'm what you call a lay person, so these are fascinating subjects for me, but honestly, I haven't studied anything in depth. This is stuff I study on my own as an adult outside of an academic setting. Anyway, I'm here on his page. Oh, yeah, he's also a senior lecturer at the Department of Biology at Lund University in Sweden. Here's a link to his academic website. I won't go there right now. He studies a lot of different stuff. You can see there's links to studies he's done about infant death syndrome, the Druze population, who are most commonly in Lebanon and Israel. But what I'm here for is his studies on localizing Ashkenazic Jews to primeval villages in ancient Iranian lands of Ashkenaz. Excuse me. So here we'll go to his research page, population genetics. Here he has a link for his studies on Ashkenazic Jews, the origin of Yiddish, and the origins of Yiddish. So Yiddish is the language of the Ashkenazic Jews. Now, the reason I'm talking about this is because I, myself, am an Ashkenazic Jew. So this is interesting, fascinating subject matter for me. This is discovering my roots, essentially. Now, there's been a lot of misinformation or debate around this issue. The findings in Iran's research or in his studies are highly controversial for political reasons that I don't feel like going into. They're silly reasons. I don't feel like the scientific findings here really should affect politics in any major way. This is ancient history. These are ethnic origins. We're just finding out where we came from, that kind of thing. So I wanted to show you guys here. This is my Ancestry DNA page. I fell for it. I sent them my spit a long time ago, and they've been updating my results. These are not the results I got originally. Originally, I was 80-something%, 83%, I think, European Jewish, with things like Italian and Greek mixed in there. But they updated as they went on. They got more accurate, I guess. They got a larger pool of samples. And what they're showing me now, after a few years of updates, is that I'm 99% European Jewish, with 1% Baltics origin, which is up here in Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania. So essentially, we can assume that my European Jewish ancestors who emigrated to the U.S. Around 100 years ago or more, actually way more than 100 years ago, probably 120 plus years ago, came from this area of Europe, but they were Jewish. Ancestry DNA gives you all kinds of other info about how they get the information, but unfortunately, this information isn't really satisfying to just tell me that I'm European Jewish. This doesn't really explain the origins of what European Jewish is or what European Jewish really means. One moment. So what we get is a lot of stories and a lot of kind of science that wants to align itself with stories, make people feel good about those themselves and the stories that they've told themselves. I like the research or the studies that Iran El Haik has done. I think they're pretty in-depth and thorough studies, and they're really trying to pinpoint the origins, the ethnic, cultural origins of me, the Ashkenazic Jew. So that's what I am. Leave all your wonderful comments or reflections on that as you will. I'm sure we'll get some lovely ones, maybe some not so lovely ones. Who cares? Okay, so the origin of Ashkenazic Jews and their language, Yiddish, have been the subject of controversy for over 3 centuries and have yet to be resolved. The Rhineland hypothesis depicts Eastern European Jews as a population isolate that emerged from a small group of German Jews who migrated eastward and expanded rapidly through a miracle. So basically, that's the popular assumption or hypothesis, is that Jews had a diaspora. We can talk about a little bit as we go, but basically the assumption is that many Jews were exported from their homeland in what was called Judea to Rome, and through Rome they spread through the Roman Empire, particularly into modern day France, Spain, and Germany. And what he's saying is they had a demographic miracle, basically rapid reproduction um, in an unnatural way. And they migrated to Eastern Europe at some point in the Middle Ages, about 1,000 years ago, because of ethnic conflict or, persecution by Germanic people. Okay, but what he's saying is this assumption or this hypothesis assumes a demographic miracle, which we'll get into later. Okay. Alternatively, the Khazarian hypothesis, very controversial term, or Irano-Turko-Slavic hypothesis, that seems a little more comfortable, suggests that Eastern European Jews descended from an amalgam of Turkic clans that settled the Caucasus in the early centuries AD and converted to Judaism during the first millennium. Okay, hot topic. So basically they're saying that the Ashkenazic or Eastern European Jews are largely converts to Judaism. They are not Hebrews as we know them from who, came from the original Canaanite people, but are actually Turkic, Slavic, and Iranic or Persian people who were mass converted to Judaism, as he'll explain later, by Persian Jews or Babylonian Jews who do descend from the Hebrews. But basically that these people were mass converted at some point in the Middle Ages, and this is the origin of Ashkenazic Jews and Yiddish. Basically minimizing the Levantine roots, I should say, of the Ashkenazic Jews. This doesn't apply to all Jewish people. This just applies to the white Jews of Europe, essentially. Okay. And now these links are to his studies, the last of which I think is the one we're going to read through because it kind of is an amalgamation of all this stuff. So, in El Hike 2013, we tested the genetic diversity among European Jews in light of two hypotheses: the Rhineland hypothesis, the narrative, and the competing Khazarian hypothesis. The results unambiguously support the Khazarian hypothesis, portraying the European Jewish genome as a tapestry of ancient ancestries and high heterogeneity. This is the most popular paper published in GBE. It was ranked #1 most read paper since its publication. The work was widely covered by the media. Okay. In Des et al., I'm not sure what that even means, a study from 2016, we aim to identify the origin of Yiddish. Since language, genetics, and geography are correlated, we reasoned that the geographical origin of Yiddish can be derived from the geographical origin of the DNA of Yiddish-speaking Ashkenazic Jews. To infer the geographical origin of their genomes, we applied the Geographic Population Structure, or GPS, tool to the genomes of over 360 Yiddish-speaking 180 non-Yiddish-speaking Ashkenazic Jews. We traced their genomes to northeast Turkey, where we uncovered 4 villages whose names may be derived from the word Ashkenaz. And you can see in this image here, there's some villages here on a map in northeast Turkey. And these 4 villages have very similar names to the word Ashkenaz, like Ashuz, Ashanaz, Eshkenaz, and Ishkenaz. And he's saying actually that the DNA of the Ashkenazic Jews in this study, Des et al. 2016, through this tool, GPS tool, was discovered to be concentrated in this area or have originated in this area. Now, perhaps we can talk about what this GPS is. I'm not sure if I'll be able to, but I will tell you that if you go to Iran's YouTube page, you find him on YouTube, Iran El Hike. You can see it up here and on his homepage. That, okay, I'm not going to go through this study or this whole paper. I mean, but if you go to his YouTube page, there's a whole video about this subject that he did. He kind of goes through his study. There's very low volume on the video, but he explains it, in much better terms. It's his study, and he's a scientist, which I am not. I am a lay person, as I mentioned. But he explains what GPS is and how it works. So through studying these Ashkenazic Jews' genomes, he found them to originate in northeastern Turkey. Happens to coincide with these 4 villages that sound a lot like Ashkenaz. Now that's a biblical term. Unsurprisingly, it seems that the Ashkenazic Jews and their language have originated in Ashkenaz. This is the largest study on Ashkenazic Jews to date. This is the first to study the genomes of Yiddish speakers. Now he goes on to talk about the paper, which was ranked #1 most read paper in GBE since its publication. This work is widely covered by the media, etc. Next study, in El Hike 2016. We questioned claims that there exist Jewish biomarkers. We did that by posing a public Jewish genome challenge, where scientists, public members, and 23andMe were asked to distinguish between Jewish and non-Jewish genomes in a blind setting. All testers have failed. We next compared the genetic distances between Jewish communities and show that they are genetically distinct from each other and from a simulated population of Judeans shown below. Let's open this in a new tab so we can get a better look. Okay, so this is the graphic he accompanies with this study. Obviously, I can go into the study and read the whole thing, but I will not. We're just going to save that for the last or the most recent study. But you can see there's all these different colors indicating different types of Jews. Personally, my heritage would align most with the Romanian Jew, as well as, let's see if they're here. Anybody else? No, probably not. Well, yeah, the Latvian and the Romanian would be more aligned to my heritage. Brown there. They're both brown. That's interesting. Okay. But as we can see, I think what this is indicating is that these different types of Jews align more closely to the indigenous people of their place than other Jews. Genetic distances 0 to 5 to 10 to 15. Interesting. So this last one with the X, I think, is supposed to be the ancient Hebrew. The Yemenite Jew is closest. Let's find the Romanian Jew, for example, would be a brown circle somewhere up here. Yeah, pretty far, as you can see. Okay. Layperson here. Lastly, we discuss common fallacies in the literature that support the existence of these biomarkers. To learn more, see 3 population science articles I wrote for The Conversation, Aeon, and Atlas of Science. So yes, I encourage everyone to go to this webpage to read more, to go more in depth than I'm going, and really see the evidence here. It's iranelhikelab.org. Get all the links to his studies, etc. You could also find his YouTube page. Let's see, Towson Bagels. Okay. Here he is. Got a couple videos, but this is the big one. Unearthing Ancient Ashkenaz and the Origin of Yiddish. So I encourage everyone to watch this video as well. Cool, man. In Das et al. 2017, I think that's the one I'm going to be reading to you. Yes, it is. We replied to the criticism of Das et al. 2016 and showed that all biogeographical analyses on Ashkenazi Jews identified Turkey as the place of DNA origin and carried out ancient DNA analysis. We also showed that Ashkenazi Jews have ancient Irano-Turkish origins and practically no Levantine ancestry. Here again, he shows us a little graphic. Let's see here. So you can see the different colors indicate the different studies that were conducted, but they are pretty consistent with Turkey. Studying the genomic origins of Ashkenazi Jewish subjects. And here, some had 4 Ashkenazi Jewish grandparents, some had 2 to 3. Interesting. Now, he's also indicating trade routes here. These are Silk Road trade routes because the conclusions here come to say that the origin of the Ashkenazic people also had to do with this popular or this important place where the trade routes of the Silk Road intersected. Here's a comparison of admixture populations in people's DNA. So I'm not sure what EHG stands for. We have Anatolian, Levantine, and Iranian. Anatolian, that's not referring to like modern day Turkish people. That's referring to the ancient Turkish people who were a sort of Indo-European people. They were a European type, Greek type person. You can see what Ashkenazi Jews look like here. So here's the various range of them. Some of them have much less Iranian admixture. Some have way more Iranian admixture. Some have way more EHG. Not sure what that is. Some have way less. What would EHG mean? Not sure. But you can see Middle Eastern people, Syrian, Palestinian, Lebanese, and Bedouins, have way more of that going on and way less of the Iranian. They obviously have way more Levantine. That's like modern day Israel. That's the gray. And you can see how little of that actually exists in the Ashkenazic Jew. But similar amounts of Anatolian admixture. Get that out of there. Okay. So let's go into the study and read a little bit there and find the evidence of how Ashkenazic Jews originate in northeastern Turkey, have minimal heritage to the Levantine, and are essentially Slavic, Iranic, Turkic peoples that were converted by Babylonian or Iranian Jews into Judaism, and which coincided with the development of the language of Yiddish. So, this study, the origins of Ashkenazic Jews and Yiddish. One moment. Study conducted by Ranajit Das from the Manipal Center for Natural Sciences in Manipal University in Manipal, India. Paul Wexler from the Department of Linguistics at Tel Aviv University in Tel Aviv, Israel. Medhi Piruznia from the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences at Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore, Maryland, United States. And finally, who we've been talking about, Iran El-Haik from the Department of Animal and Plant Sciences at the University of Sheffield in the UK. Okay, so it's also said he taught in Sweden, I think, on his other page, or he lectures in Sweden at a university in Sweden. Here we go. Recently, the geographical origins of Ashkenazic Jews, or AJs, and their native language Yiddish were investigated by applying the geographic population structure, or GPS, to a cohort of exclusively Yiddish-speaking and multilingual Ashkenazic Jews. GPS localized most Ashkenazic Jews along major ancient trade routes in northeastern Turkey, adjacent to primeval villages with names that resemble the word Ashkenaz. These findings were compatible with the hypothesis of an Irano-Turko-Slavic origin for Ashkenazic Jews and a Slavic origin for Yiddish and at odds with the Rhineland hypothesis advocating a Levantine origin for Ashkenazic Jews and German origins for Yiddish. We discuss how these findings advance three ongoing debates concerning one, the historical meaning of the term Ashkenaz. 2. The genetic structure of Ashkenazic Jews and their geographical origins as inferred from multiple studies employing both modern and ancient DNA and original ancient DNA analyses. And 3. The development of Yiddish. Now, my grandfather's first language was Yiddish, so this definitely applies to my heritage. We provide additional validation to the non-Levantine origin of Ashkenazic Jews using ancient DNA from the Near East and the Levant. Due to the rising popularity of geolocalization tools to address questions of origin, we briefly discuss the advantages and limitations of popular tools with focus on the GPS approach. Our results reinforce the non-Levantine origins of Ashkenazic Jews. Okay. Again, what's being said here is highly controversial and political to some people. To these people, this is just scientific research, so calm down, everybody. All our Zionists out there. I love you, but just chill out. Listen to what the study has to say. Get some truth about who you are, about your ethnic heritage. You European. Okay. Background. This is really bad timing for this haircut, I feel like. Okay. My Tyler Durden head. Tyler Durden, you get it? Okay. Fuck, where was I? Background. The geographical origin of the biblical Ashkenaz, Ashkenazic Jews, and Yiddish are among the longest standing questions in history, genetics, and linguistics. Uncertainties concerning the meaning of Ashkenaz arose in the 11th century when the term shifted from a designation of the Iranian Scythians to become that of Slavs and Germans, and finally of German, quote-unquote, Ashkenazic Jews in the 11th to 13th centuries. The first known discussion of the origin of German Jews and Yiddish surfaced in the writings of the Hebrew grammarian Elia Baxter in the first half of the 16th century. It is well established that history is also reflected in the DNA through relationships between genetics, geography, and language, e.g. that was a source. Max Weinrich, the doyen of the field of modern Yiddish linguistics, has already emphasized the truism that the history of Yiddish mirrors the history of its speakers. These relationships prompted Das et al. 2016, this study, to address the question of Yiddish origin by analyzing the genomes of Yiddish-speaking Ashkenazic Jews, multilingual Ashkenazic Jews, and Sephardic Jews, using the geographical population structure, which localizes genomes to where they experience the last major admixture event. GPS traced nearly all Ashkenazic Jews to major ancient trade routes in northeastern Turkey, adjacent to 4 primeval villages whose names resemble Ashkenaz, Ishkenaz or Eshkenaz, Eshkenez or Eshkens, Ashanaz, and Ashuz, evaluated in light of the Rhineland and Irano-Turko-Slavic hypotheses. The findings supported the latter, implying that Yiddish was created by Slavo-Iranian Jewish merchants plying the Silk Roads. We discussed these findings from historical, genetic, and linguistic perspectives and calculate the genetic similarity of Ashkenazic Jews and Middle Eastern populations to ancient genomes from Anatolia, Iran, and the Levant. We lastly review briefly the advantages and limitation of biolocalization tools and their application in genetic research. So they're going in depth. You know what? Let me just zoom this in a little bit, if I can. Make it easier to read here. Maybe too much. Okay. So, they give us a table to read. Okay, so we have some comparisons, some open questions, and here's a comparison of the two competing hypotheses. They're supporting the Irano-Turkic-Slavic hypothesis, and here they provide evidence in favor of the Irano-Turko-Slavic hypothesis. But here's the competing or mainstream, as we would say, Rhineland hypothesis. I mean, it's not just because it's competing doesn't mean it's mainstream. This just happens to be the mainstream opinion, the Rhineland hypothesis. So let's take our time and go through this. So the term Ashkenaz, which I mentioned, is a term that goes back to the Bible. According to the Rhineland hypothesis, Ashkenaz originally affiliated with the people living north of biblical Israel or north of the Black Sea, used in Hebrew and Yiddish sources from the 11th century onward to denote a region in what is now roughly southern Germany. However, the Irano-Turko-Slavic hypothesis, according to this, the Ashkenaz term denotes an Iranian people near Armenia, presumably Scythians known as Askuza. Askuza or Iskuza in Assyrian inscriptions of the early 7th century BC. Now, the evidence in favor of that, GPS analysis uncovered 4 primeval villages in northeastern Turkey whose names resemble Ashkenaz, at least one of which predates any major Jewish settlement in Germany. Ashkenaz is thereby a place name associated with the Near East and its inhabitants, both Jews and non-Jews. As he mentioned, Scythians. Next question. The ancestral origin of Ashkenazic Jews. Where do we come from? According to the Rhineland hypothesis, Judeans living in Judea until 70 AD who were exiled by the Romans and remained in relative isolation from neighboring non-Jewish communities during and after the diaspora. This scenario has no historical nor genetic support. There's his source. Now, the competing Irano-Turko-Slavic hypothesis says a minority of Judean immigrants and a majority of Irano-Turko-Slavic converts to Judaism. That makes a lot of sense. For some reason, I feel like people assume that throughout history, Jews did not convert others into the religion. That's not true for all of history, especially this demographic period, this demographic miracle period in the Middle Ages. We're talking about 900 AD to 1000 AD, I think, which he's probably going to mention down here, or he will mention at some point. The growth of Eastern European Jewry. That's a demographic miracle I'm talking about. Here he's going to talk about. We'll get into it. I have looked through these things in the past, or I watched his YouTube video. The evidence for this, Ashkenazic Jews, the evidence for this, the minority of Judean immigrants and the majority of Irano-Turko-Slavic converts, Ashkenazic Jews exhibit high genetic similarity to populations living in Turkey and the Caucasus. All biolocation analyses predicted Ashkenazic Jews to Turkey. Ancient DNA analyses provide strong evidence of the Iranian Neolithic ancestry of Ashkenazic Jews. He has figures showing the evidence of that. Next, question. The arrival of Jews to German lands. How did we get there? How did my name become German? After the arrival of Palestinian Jews to Roman lands, this is the assumption of the Rhineland hypothesis, After the arrival of Palestinian Jews to Roman lands, Jewish merchants and the soldiers arrived to German lands with the Roman army and settled there. Again, this scenario has no historical support. That's according to Wexler, 1993, Sand, 2009. But this hypothesis, the new hypothesis, we'll call it, Jews from the Khazar Empire and the former Iranian Empire. Now, the Khazar Empire was a medieval empire who actually converted its nobility to Judaism around the same time that many other European pagan societies were converting to Christianity, and when the Persian people were converting to Islam, so the Abrahamic religions were essentially taking over. And this empire, the Khazars, decided to turn their people Jewish, perhaps to have more advantage on the Silk Road trade routes in their area, which was like we said, modern. Well, haven't said this yet. It's like modern Russia, southern Russia. Jews from the Khazar Empire and the former Iranian Empire, applying the old Roman trade routes and Silk Roads, began to settle in the mixed Germano-Sorbian lands during the first millennium. Okay, so as far back as 2,000 years. The evidence for this: Ashkenazic Jews were predicted to a Near Eastern hub of ancient trade routes that connected Europe, Asia, and the northern Caucasus. The findings imply that migration to Europe took place initially through trade routes going west and later through Khazar lands. Great. Next question is Yiddish's emergence in the 9th century. I'll go here. The Rhineland hypothesis says between the 9th and 10th centuries, French and Italian-speaking Jewish immigrants adopted and adapted the local German dialects. Again, they were French and Italian-speaking because they had come to the Roman lands through in 70 AD when the Romans exiled them. Again, there's little evidence for that actually happening. That's where they were French and Italian speaking. But the Khazar hypothesis, upon arrival to German lands, Western and Eastern Slavic went through a re-lexification to German, creating what became known as Yiddish. So it started as a different language, a more Slavic language, and then was re-lexified, so it added vocabulary from German. And that's why Yiddish seems like a Germanic language or German language. The evidence for the Irano-Turko-Slavic hypothesis. This study inferred admixture time of 960 to 1416 AD corresponds to a time period during which Ashkenazic Jews have experienced major demographic changes. At that time, Ashkenazic Jews were speculated to have absorbed Slavic people, developed Slavic Yiddish, and intensified the migration to Europe. Lastly, the last question is the growth of Eastern European Jewry. How did the population expand? Well, this hypothesis, the Rhineland hypothesis, says a small group of German Jews migrated to Eastern Europe and reproduced via a so-called demographic miracle, which resulted in an unnatural growth rate of 1.7 to 2% annually, over half a millennium, acting only on Jews residing in Eastern Europe. This explanation is unsupported by the data. However, the Khazar hypothesis says that during the half millennium, the 740 to 1250 CE, Khazar and Iranian lands harbored the largest Eurasian Jewish centers. Ashkenazic, Khazar, and Iranian Jews then sent offshoots into the Slavic lands. The evidence in favor of that is that most of the Ashkenazic Jews were predicted to northeastern Turkey, and the remaining individuals clustered along the gradient going from Turkey to Eastern European lands. This is in agreement with the recorded conversions of populations living along the southern shores of the Black Sea to Judaism. A German origin of Ashkenazic Jews is unsupported by the data. Very good. So we can get out of this figure, we can go back to the study. The historical meaning of Ashkenaz. Ashkenaz is one of the most disputed biblical place names. It appears in the Hebrew Bible as the name of one of Noah's descendants in Genesis 10:3, and as a reference to the kingdom of Ashkenaz, prophesied to be called together with Ararat and Minai to wage war against Babylon. That's Jeremiah 51:27. In addition to tracing Ashkenazic Jews to the ancient Iranian lands of Ashkenaz and uncovering the villages whose names may derive from Ashkenaz, the partial Iranian origin of Ashkenazic Jews, inferred by Das et al. 2016, was further supported by the genetic similarity of Ashkenazic Jews to Sephardic Mountain Jews and Iranian Jews, as well as their similarity to Near Eastern populations and simulated native Turkish and Caucasus populations. There are good grounds, therefore, for inferring that Jews who considered themselves Ashkenazic adopted this name and spoke of their lands as Ashkenaz, since they perceived themselves as of Iranian origin. We find varied evidence of the knowledge of Iranian language among Moroccan and Andalusian Jews and Karaites prior to the 11th century is a compelling point of reference to assess the shared Iranian origins of Sephardic and Ashkenazic Jews. Moreover, Iranian-speaking Jews in the Caucasus, the so-called Juhuris, and Turkic-speaking Jews in the Crimea prior to World War II called themselves Ashkenazim. Very interesting. The Rhineland hypothesis cannot explain why a name that denotes Scythians and was associated with the Near East became associated with German lands in the 11th to 13th centuries. Aptroot 2016 suggested that Jewish immigrants in Europe transferred biblical names onto the regions in which they settled. This is unconvincing. Biblical names were used as place names only when they had similar sounds. Not only Germany and Ashkenaz do not share similar sounds, but Germany was already named Germana or Germamja in the Iranian or Babylonian Talmud, completed in the 5th century AD, and, not surprisingly, was associated with Noah's grandson Gomer from the Talmud Yoma 10a. Name adoption also occurred when the exact place names were in doubt, as in the case of Sepharad, or Spain. This is not the case here, as Aptroot 2 notes, since Ashkenaz has not known and clear geographical since Ashkenaz had a known and clear geographical affiliation. This is not the case here, right? Finally, Germany was known to French scholars like the Radake, not sure what that means, 1160 to 1235, as Alemania, Spanish Alemania or French Aleman. These Alemanni tribes, a term that was also adopted by Arab scholars after the Alemanni tribes. Okay. Had the French scholar Rashi, 1040 maybe to 1105, was interpreted Ashkenaz as Germany, it would have been known that the Radak who used Rashi's symbols. To the Radak. Sorry, I'm misreading. Therefore, Wexler's proposal that Rashi used Ashkenaz as the meaning of Slavic and that the term Ashkenaz assumed the solitary meaning German lands only after the 11th century in Western Europe as a result of the rise of Yiddish is more reasonable. This is also supported by Das et al.'s major findings of the only known primeval villages whose names derive from the word Ashkenaz, located in the ancient lands of Ashkenaz. Our inference is therefore supported by historical, linguistic, and genetic evidence, which has more weight as a simple origin that can be easily explained than a more complex scenario that involves multiple translocations. I agree with that. Why not? The genetic structure of Ashkenazic Jews. Okay. Ashkenazic Jews were localized to modern-day Turkey and found to be genetically closest to Turkic, Southern Caucasian, and Iranian populations, suggesting a common origin in Iranian Ashkenaz lands. These findings were more compatible with the Irano-Turko-Slavic origin for Ashkenazic Jews and a Slavic origin for Yiddish than with the Rhineland hypothesis, which lacks historical, genetic, and linguistic support. Table 1. I believe that we already looked at that table, but let's find out. Can I open that? Okay, sorry. Oh, I am in the wrong thing. Right, brought us back to table 1, which we read. Beautiful. The findings have also highlighted the strong social, cultural, and genetic bonds of Ashkenazic and Iranian Judaism and their shared Iranian origins. Basically saying there's greater similarity between Ashkenazic Jews and Iranian Jews than there is between Ashkenazic and Sephardic Jews, who were the presumed predecessors or closest offshoot. Thus far, all analyses aimed to geolocalize Ashkenazic Jews identified Turkey as the predominant origin of Ashkenazic Jews, although they use different approaches and datasets in support of the Irano-Turko-Slavic hypothesis. Figure 1a, Table 1. The existence of both major Southern European and Near Eastern ancestries in Ashkenazic Jewish genomes are also strong indicators of the Irano-Turko-Slavic hypothesis, provided the Greco-Roman history of the region southern to the Black Sea. Okay. Recently, applied Globetrotter to the data set. This study applied Globetrotter to a data set of 2,540 Ashkenazic Jews genotyped over 252,358 SNPs. Not sure what that means. The inferred ancestry profile for Ashkenazic Jews was 5% Western Europe, 10% Eastern Europe, 30% Levant, and 55% Southern Europe. A Near East ancestry was not considered by the authors. This study, Elhike 2013, portrayed a similar profile for European Jews, consisting of 25 to 30% Middle East and large Near Eastern Caucasus, 32 to 38%, and West European, 30% ancestries. Remarkably, Zhu et al. 2017 also inferred an admixture time of 960 to 1460 AD, about 24 to 40 generations ago, which corresponds to the time Ashkenazic Jews experienced major geographical shifts as the Judaized Khazar kingdom diminished and their trading networks collapsed, forcing them to relocate to Europe. The lower boundary of that date corresponds to the time Slavic Yiddish originated, to the best of our knowledge. We already looked at this figure, but he talks about it. So let me open it for a second. Here's showing the 4 villages that sound like Ashkenaz in northeastern Turkey, showing the biomarkers or the location markers done through GPS of these Ashkenazic Jewish subjects. And here is an admixture graph, essentially showing different populations and their admixtures in different subjects. Ashkenazic Jews here, Syrian, Palestinian, Lebanese, and Bedouin. These are Levantine people, essentially being compared to Ashkenazic Jews, showing a huge amount more of Iranian admixture in the Ashkenazic Jews than in the Levantine people, but also a huge amount more of Levantine admixture in the Levantine people than in Ashkenazic Jews. There's some, but not a lot. Figure 1, the localization of Ashkenazic Jews and their ancient admixture proportions compared to neighboring populations. Okay, geographical predictions of individuals analyzed in 3 separate studies employing different tools. Those are the 3 studies. Dark green is for Ashkenazic Jews who have 4 Ashkenazic Jewish grandparents, like myself, and light green for the rest are shown. Take a look. So dark green and light green, you can see. They're pretty much on top of each other. We also have, different colors indicate the 4 different studies. Color matching mean and standard deviation, the bars, of the longitude and latitude are shown for each cohort. Since we were unsuccessful in obtaining the data points of Behar et al. From 2013, from the corresponding author, we procured 78% of the data points from their figure. Due to the low quality of their figure, we were unable to reliably extract the remaining data points. Okay, Supervised admixture results. That's the next, that's B on the bottom here. For brevity, subpopulations were collapsed. The x-axis represents individuals. Each individual is represented by a vertical stacked column of color-coded admixture proportions that reflect genetic contributions from ancient hunter-gatherer. That's what EHG is. Ancient hunter-gatherers, Anatolians, Levantine, and Iranian individuals. So you can see where the ancient hunter-gatherers, European hunter-gatherers. So these are ancient European Neolithic peoples. Very interesting. Okay. The non-Levantine origin of Ashkenazic Jews is further supported by an ancient DNA analysis of 6 Natufians and a Levantine Neolithic, some of the most likely Judean progenitors. In a principal component analysis, the ancient Levantines clustered predominantly with modern-day Palestinians and Bedouins and marginally overlapped with Arabian Jews, whereas Ashkenazic Jews clustered away from the Levantine individuals and adjacent to Neolithic Anatolians and late Neolithic and Bronze Age Europeans. But you saw in the previous chart that there was actually kind of a minimal amount of European hunter-gatherer, which means that Ashkenazic Jews are largely what we would call Indo-European people. To evaluate these findings, we inferred the ancient ancestries of Ashkenazic Jews using the admixture analysis described in Marshall et al. Briefly, we analyzed 18,757 autosomal SNPs genotyped in 46 Palestinians, 45 Bedouins, 16 Syrians, and 8 Lebanese, alongside 467 Ashkenazic Jews. 367 Ashkenazic Jews previously analyzed, and 100 individuals with an Ashkenazic Jewish mother that overlapped with both the genotype and ancient DNA data when we carried out a supervised admixture analysis using 3 East European hunter-gatherers from Russia alongside 6 Epipaleolithic Levantines, 24 Neolithic Anatolians, and 6 Neolithic Iranians as reference populations. Good. Remarkably, Ashkenazic Jews exhibit a dominant Iranian at 88% and residual Levantine at only 3% ancestries, as opposed to Bedouins with 14 and 68% respectively, and Palestinians with 18 and 58 respectively. You can see here. Only 2 Ashkenazic Jews exhibit Levantine ancestries typical to Levantine populations. In figure 1b. Let's just take a look at that once more. It's probably the same thing we were just looking at. Yeah, okay, I'm just opening up the... Okay, 2 individuals. So these spikes, these individual lines, are the individuals being tested. Not sure if we can find those 2 individuals in here. Okay. Repeating the analysis with Admix Tools version 4.1, we found that Ashkenazic Jews admixture could be modeled using either 3 Neolithic Anatolians, Neolithic Iranians, and European hunter-gatherers, or 2-way Neolithic Iranians and European hunter-gatherers, migration waves. There's a supplementary text for that. These findings should be reevaluated when medieval DNA would become available. Good. Overall, the combined results are in a strong agreement with the predictions of the Irano-Turko-Slavic hypothesis and rule out an ancient Levantine origin for Ashkenazic Jews, which is predominant among modern-day Levantine populations, e.g. Bedouins and Palestinians. This is not surprising since Jews differed in cultural practices and norms and tended to adopt local customs. Very little Palestinian Jewish culture survived outside of Palestine. For example, the folklore and folkways of Jews in Northern Europe is distinctly pre-Christian German and Slavic in origin, which disappeared among the latter. Wow, that's interesting. So it's almost like the European Jews are preserving some of the ancient pre-Christian traditions of the Europeans. Crazy. Get that out of here. The linguistic debate concerning formation of Yiddish. The hypothesis that Yiddish has a German origin ignores the mechanics of re-lexification, the linguistic process which produced Yiddish and other Old Jewish languages, i.e. those created by the 9th to 10th century. Understanding how re-lexification operates is essential to understanding the evolution of languages. This argument has a similar context to that of the evolution of powered flight. Rejecting the theory of evolution may lead one to conclude that birds and bats are close relatives. By disregarding the literature on re-lexification and Jewish history in the Middle Ages, authors reach conclusions that have weak historical support. The advantage of a geolocalization analysis is that it allows us to infer the geographical origin of speakers of Yiddish, where they resided and with whom they intermingled, and independently of historical controversies, which provides a data-driven view on the question of geographical origins. This allows an objective review of potential linguistic influences on Yiddish, which exposes the dangers in adopting a linguistic creationism view in linguistics. The historical evidence in favor of an Irano-Turko-Slavic origin for Yiddish is paramount. Jews played a major role on the Silk Roads in the 9th to 11th century. In the mid-9th century, in roughly the same years, Jewish merchants in both Mainz and at Xi'an received special trading privileges from the Holy Roman Empire and the Tang Dynasty court. These roads linked Xi'an to Mainz and to Andalusia and further to sub-Saharan Africa and across the Arabian Peninsula and India-Pakistan. The Silk Roads provided the motivation for Jewish settlement in Afro-Eurasia in the 9th to 11th centuries, since the Jews played a dominant role on these routes as a neutral trading guild with no political agendas. Hence, the Jewish traders had contact with a wealth of languages in the areas that they traversed, which they brought back to their communities, nested in major trading hubs. The Central Eurasian Silk Roads were controlled by Iranian polities, which provided opportunities for Iranian-speaking Jews who constituted the overwhelming bulk of the world's Jews from the time of Christ to the 11th century. It should not come as a surprise to find that Yiddish and other old Jewish languages contain components and rules from a large variety of languages, all of them spoken on the Silk Roads. In addition to language contacts, the Silk Roads also provide the motivation for widespread conversion to Judaism by populations eager to participate in the extremely lucrative trade, which had become a Jewish quasi-monopoly along the trade routes. Let's not get too controversial here. These conversions are discussed in Jewish literature between the 6th and 11th centuries, both in Europe and Iraq. Yiddish and other Old Jewish languages were all created by the peripatetic merchants as secret languages that would isolate them from their customers and non-Jewish trading partners. The study of Yiddish Genesis thereby necessitates the study of all the Old Jewish languages of this time period. There is also a quantifiable amount of Iranian and Turkic elements in Yiddish. The Babylonian Talmud, completed by the 6th century AD, is rich in Iranian linguistic, legalistic, and religious influences. From the Talmud, a large Iranian vocabulary has entered Hebrew and Judeo-Aramaic, and from there spread to Yiddish. This corpus has been known since the 1930s and is common knowledge to Talmud scholars. In the Khazar Empire, the Eurasian Jews, plying the Silk Roads, became speakers of Slavic, an important language because of the trading activities of the Rus, the pre-Ukrainians, with whom the Jews were undoubtedly allied on the routes linking Baghdad and Bavaria. This is evident by the existence of newly invented Hebrewism, inspired by Slavic patterns of discourse in Yiddish. We advocate for implementing a more evolutionary understanding in linguistics. That includes giving more attention to the linguistic process that alter languages, e.g., relexification, and acquiring more competence in other languages and histories. When studying the origin of Ashkenazic Jews and Yiddish, such knowledge should include the history of the Silk Roads and Irano-Turkish languages. Very good. Let's see where we're at. I'm just going to take a little peek ahead. Good, so we're almost done. Inference of geographical origins. Deciphering the origin of human populations is not a new challenge for geneticists. Yet, only in the past decade, high-throughput genetic data were harnessed to answer these questions. Here, we briefly discuss the differences between the available tools based on identity by distance, existing PCA or PCA-like approaches can localize Europeans to countries, understood as the last place where major admixture event took place, or the place where the four ancestors of unmixed individuals came from, with less than 50% accuracy. Yeah, that's the end. With less than 50% accuracy. The limitations of PCA discussed in this study appear to be inherent in the framework where continental populations plotted along the two primary PCs cluster in the vertices of a triangle-like shape, and the remaining populations cluster along or within the edges. That's in El Haik et al. 2013. Now, I think I'll be reading that study in the next video in order to supplement what's going on here. There is therefore reason to question the applicability of ambitious PCA-based models, aiming to infer multiple ancestral locations outside of Europe. Overall, accurate localization of worldwide individuals remains a significant challenge. The GPS framework assumes that humans are mixed and that their genetic variation or admixture can be modeled by the proportion of genotypes assigned to any number of fixed regional putative ancestral populations. GPS employs a supervised admixture analysis where the admixture components are fixed, which allows evaluating both the test individuals and reference populations against the same putative ancestral populations. GPS infers the geographical coordinates of an individual by matching their admixture proportions with those of reference populations. Reference populations are populations known to reside in a certain geographical region for a substantial period of time, in a time frame of hundreds to 1,000 years, and can be predicted to their geographical locations while absent from the reference population panel. The final geographic location of a test individual is determined by converting the genetic distance of the individual to M reference populations into geographic distances. Intuitively, the reference populations can be thought of as pulling the individual in their direction with a strength proportional to their genetic similarity until a consensus is reached. Interpreting the results, particularly when the predicted location differs from the contemporary location of the studied population, demands caution. Population structure is affected by biological and demographic processes like genetic drift, which can act rapidly on small, relatively isolated populations, as opposed to large, non-isolated populations, and migration, which occurs more frequently. Understanding the geography admixture relationships necessitates knowing how relative isolation and migration history affected the allele frequencies of populations. Unfortunately, oftentimes we lack information about both processes. GPS addresses this problem by analyzing the relative proportions of admixture in a global network for reference populations that provide us with different snapshots of historical admixture events. These global admixture events occurred at different times through different biological and demographic processes, and their long-lasting effect is related to our ability to associate an individual with their matching admixture event. In relatively isolated populations, the admixture event is likely old, and GPS would localize a test individual with their parental population more accurately. By contrast, if the admixture event was recent, the population did not maintain relative isolation. GPS prediction would be erroneous. This is the case of Caribbean populations, whose admixture populations still reflect the massive 19th and 20th centuries mixture events involving Native Americans, West Europeans, and Africans. While the original level of isolation remains unknown, these two scenarios can be distinguished by comparing the admixture proportions of the test individual and adjacent populations. If this similarity is high, we can conclude that we have inferred the likely location of the admixture event that shaped the admixture proportion of the test individual. If the opposite is true, the individual is either mixed and thereby violates the assumptions of the GPS model, or the parental populations do not exist, either in GPS's reference panel or in reality. Most of the time, 83% of the time, GPS predicted unmixed individuals to their true locations, with most of the remaining individuals predicted to neighboring countries. To understand how migration modifies the admixture proportions of the migratory and host populations, we can consider two simple cases of point or of massive migration followed by assimilation, and a third case of migration followed by isolation. Point migration events have little effect on the admixture proportions of the host population, particularly when it absorbs a paucity of migrants, in which case the migrants' admixture proportions would resemble those of the host population within a few generations, and their resting place would represent that of the host population. Massive demographic movements, such as large-scale invasion or migration that affect a large part of the population, are rare and create temporal shifts in the admixture proportions of the host population. Okay. The host population would temporarily appear as a two-way mixed population, reflecting the components of the host and the invading populations, e.g. European and Native American in the case of Puerto Ricans, until the admixture proportions would homogenize population-wise. If this process is completed, the admixture signature of this region may be altered and the geographical placement of the host population would represent again the last place where the admixture event took place for both the host and the invading populations. GPS would thereby predict the host population's location for both populations. Populations that migrate from A to B and maintain genetic isolation would be predicted to point A in the leave one out population analysis. While human migrations are not uncommon, maintaining a perfect genetic isolation over a long period of time is very difficult, and GPS predictions for the vast majority of worldwide populations indicate that these cases are indeed exceptional. Despite of its advantages, GPS has several limitations. First, it yields the most accurate predictions for unmixed individuals. Second, using migratory or highly mixed populations, both are detectable through the leave one out population analysis, as reference populations may bias the predictions. Further developments are necessary to overcome these limitations and make GPS applicable to mixed population groups, like African Americans. Conclusion. That was weird. Conclusion. Fighting these L's. The meaning of the term Ashkenaz and the geographical origins of Ashkenazi Jews and Yiddish are some of the longest standing questions in history, genetics, and linguistics. In our previous work, we have identified ancient Ashkenaz, a region in northeastern Turkey that harbors 4 primeval villages whose names resemble Ashkenaz. Here, we elaborate on the meaning of this term and argue that it acquired its modern meaning only after a critical mass of Ashkenazic Jews arrived in Germany. We show that all biolocalization analyses have localized Ashkenazic Jews to Turkey, and that the non-Levantine origin of Ashkenazic Jews are supported by ancient genome analyses. Overall, these findings are compatible with the hypothesis of an Irano-Turko-Slavic origin for Ashkenazic Jews and a Slavic origin for Yiddish, and contradict the predictions of Rhineland hypothesis that lacks historical, genetic, and linguistic support. Great. In the next video, I'm going to read the previous study from 2013. This one, let's see. Oh, so that was one from 2017, right? This one we're going to read next, right? That was that. Okay, actually, no, we're going to read this one next, 2016, and then we'll probably go back to 2013 before that. So let's see what this one looks like. Good. So, part 2, we'll be reading this previous study, localizing Ashkenazic Jews to primeval villages in the ancient Iranian lands of Ashkenaz. Very good. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.